Right. So, have you ever played one of those games that just makes you want to like obliterate everything, become this unstoppable force?
Oh, yeah, totally.
It's like the ultimate power fantasy, right?
Definitely.
Well, that's kind of what we're looking at today with this deep dive into Space Marine 2.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so imagine you're this genetically enhanced super soldier, like a walking tank with a chainsaw just tearing through hordes of Tyranids.
Sounds pretty intense.
Yeah, and get this, two of our sources actually say that this game has like some of the most satisfying combat in any game out there.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, so what's the secret sauce?
Well, it's interesting actually. Both sources we looked at immediately compare it to Doom.
Okay.
Yeah, and they say that Space Marine 2 has this push forward combat style where aggression is like the key.
Oh, so you're not like hiding behind cover or anything.
Nope, you're rewarded for basically just diving headfirst into the chaos.
So it's like turning the battlefield into your own personal mosh pit.
Pretty much, yeah.
Sounds intense, I gotta say. But this is a co-op game, right?
Yeah.
So how does that like push forward style work when you've got a whole squad at your side?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Just imagine that feeling of like relentless assault, but it's amplified because you're part of a coordinated unit.
Oh, I see.
Like this wall of unstoppable force moving across the battlefield.
Okay.
It's not just you against the Horde, it's a brotherhood of destruction.
So it's kind of like that feeling you get in Left 4 Dead?
Yeah.
Exact
got it.
ramped up to 11.
Exactly, yeah.
So it's less about like desperate survival and more about like coordinated tactical domination.
Yeah, you got it.
I'm starting to see the appeal here for sure. But even with a squad, I mean, we're still talking about one Space Marine against tons of Tyranids.
Oh, yeah.
How do you actually feel powerful against those odds?
Well, both sources really emphasize how the game nails the feeling of weight and brutality.
Okay.
You're not some nimble soldier. You're this force of nature.
Right.
Every step, every swing, every impact is designed to make you feel like a superhuman warrior.
So even if you're outnumbered, you still feel like the apex predator?
Absolutely. And the game reinforces that by completely ditching a cover system.
Oh, wow.
You're not meant to hide. You're meant to be in the thick of it, ripping and tearing through enemies.
So no cover at all?
Nope.
That's pretty hardcore. I guess it really forces you to lean into that whole Space Marine fantasy.
Exactly.
There's no room for timidity.
Yeah, no kidding.
But I gotta ask, with all that aggression, how do you even survive?
Well, that's where the execution system comes in.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's not just a visual flourish, it's a core mechanic.
Interesting.
When you're low on health, you don't back down, you push forward even harder, and you perform these brutal executions on enemies to regain health and keep the momentum going.
So it's like a reward system for staying aggressive.
Exactly.
You're essentially feeding off the carnage to become even stronger.
You got it. And it ties in perfectly with that whole Space Marine mentality.
Yeah, they're not about retreating, they're about dominating every encounter. I could see how that would be incredibly satisfying. It's almost like a risk-reward system. The more you push your luck, the more powerful you become.
For sure.
But is it ever too much? Does it ever feel like the game is forcing you to be overly aggressive?
That's a great question, and it's actually something Out of the Sources touches on.
Okay.
Yeah, they mention that while the constant need to be on the offensive is exhilarating, it can also become a little one-dimensional after a while.
Yeah, I can see that.
They suggest that maybe a bit more tactical variety would have added some more depth to the gameplay.
Right, because you're this unstoppable force, but are you really making any meaningful choices?
That's the question, isn't it?
I guess that's something we'll have to look at when we dive deeper into the combat system.
For sure.
But before we get into those details, I think there's another element here that adds to this feeling of overwhelming power.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
And that's the sound design.
Oh, yeah.
One of the sources describes it as like a symphony of destruction. Every footstep is this thunderous boom. Every bolt or round feels like a mini explosion, and the chainsaw.
Oh, man. The chainsaw.
I know, right? It's got to be iconic.
Oh, it is. The way it screams as it tears through flesh and bone is horrifying and exhilarating at the same time.
Wow.
It's almost artistic in its brutality.
It's like they took the sound design from like a classic action movie and cranked it up to 11.
Exact.
Then it all comes together to really immerse you in the experience.
Oh, for sure.
You truly feel like you're at the heart of this epic conflict.
It's not just seeing the action, it's about feeling it in your bones.
So we've got this brutal push-forward combat system, a squad dynamic, that adds a whole other layer to the power fantasy and this sound design that puts you right in the middle of the action.
Yeah.
It sounds like they've really pulled out all the stops to make you feel like a true Space Marine.
It really does. But, with all this emphasis on power and aggression, does Space Marine 2 ever cross the line into glorifying violence?
That's a good point. It's one thing to feel powerful, it's another to revel in the carnage.
Right. Maybe the narrative or the context surrounding the violence plays a role in shaping that perception.
Exactly, and that's definitely something we'll want to explore further as we build deeper into the world of Space Marine 2. But for now, let's take a closer look at how this game actually plays. What are the specific mechanics that make this combat so satisfying?
Let's do it. So we've talked about how Space Marine 2 makes you feel like a total badass, especially with your squad right there with you.
Yeah, definitely.
But how does the game actually pull that off? What makes the combat so addictive?
Well, one thing that really stood out in both sources was the incredible feedback you get from like every action you take.
Okay.
It's like you're not just pressing buttons, you're feeling the weight of the weapons, the impact of every blow.
Oh, I see.
They describe it as like visceral, almost like you're physically connected to what's happening on screen.
So it's like the difference between watching a fight and actually being in one.
Yeah, exactly.
You want to feel that crunch of every hit, the force of every swing. Exactly. And the sources say Space Marine 2 really nails that feeling. They talk about how the animations are so detailed and how the sound effects are perfectly synced with what you're seeing, creating this like symphony of destruction that really sucks you in.
You know, that kind of reminds me of games like God of War.
Oh, yeah.
Remember how satisfying it was to like land those act throws and feel the impact in the controller?
Oh, yeah, totally.
I bet Space Marine 2 takes that kind of visceral feedback to a whole other level.
Oh, for sure. It seems like it. And they even mention how they use things like camera shake and controller vibration to like enhance that sense of impact.
Oh, wow.
Like they've thought of every little detail to make you feel like you're really wielding these powerful weapons.
Yeah, but feeling powerful isn't just about how your actions look and feel right.
Right.
It's also about the mechanics, like how your abilities and weapons work with the enemies.
Absolutely. And that's where the game's focus on aggressive play really stands out.
Okay?
The sources talk about how the enemy AI is designed to keep you on the offensive at all times.
Oh, wow.
They're relentless, they swarm you, they force you to be proactive and use everything you've got.
So it's not just mindlessly mowing down hordes.
No. There's definitely a strategic element to it. You can't just stand there and blast away. You need to be moving, dodging, using your abilities to control the flow of the fight.
It's like a dance.
Yeah, one source even compared it to like a deadly dance where you're weaving through enemies, delivering these punishing blows, and always staying one step ahead.
You know, that sounds like my kind of game.
Yeah.
I love it when a game makes you master its systems and really understand how everything works together.
And that mastery is what feeds into the power fantasy.
Right.
It's not just about brute force, it's about knowing when to use the right weapon, the right ability, the right tactic to overcome each challenge.
Okay, so speaking of weapons, what kind of arsenal does a Space Marine have in this game?
Well, you've got the classics, of course, bolters, chainswords, power fists,
Right.
but they also mention some more like exotic stuff like plasma cannons and melta-guns.
Oh, cool.
They even talk about a grappling nut.
Wait, a grappling hook?
Yeah, you can use it to pull yourself towards enemies or even yank them towards you.
That sounds awesome. I can just imagine zipping across the battlefield, pulling off crazy aerial takedowns.
And that's the point.
Talk about feeling powerful.
They want you to feel like you have this incredible freedom of movement and a ton of options for taking care of enemies.
Right.
It's not just about shooting, it's about using the environment, your abilities, and your weapons in creative ways.
It sounds like they put a lot of thought into making each encounter feel dynamic.
Definitely.
You're not just going through the motions, you're constantly making decisions, reacting to what's happening around you.
Exactly. And that brings us back to the whole cooperative aspect of the game.
Right.
Because when you have a squad working together, coordinating their attacks, combining abilities, that's when the power fantasy really explodes.
Oh yeah, it's like that scene in Avengers where they're all fighting back to back, using their unique skills to take down the enemy.
Exactly. It's all about synergy, about creating this unstoppable force that's greater than the sum of its parts.
I'm with you.
And the sources really emphasize how Space Marine 2 makes you feel like you're part of something epic.
Okay, you've convinced me I'm officially hyped to play this game, but before we wrap up, there's one thing I'm still curious about.
Okay.
We've talked about how the game makes you feel powerful, but what about the story itself? Does Space Marine 2 deliver on the narrative front?
Let's get into it.
So we've got this awesome combat, a tight-knit squad, and even a grappling book.
Don't forget the grappling book.
But does Space Marine 2 have a story that can measure up to the action?
Well, it seems like the story is a big part of the whole thing. Both sources talk about how the story puts you right in the middle of this huge war with the Tyranids.
So it's not just about mindlessly squashing bugs, there's an actual plot.
Yeah, for sure. You're not just some random soldier. You're playing as Lieutenant Titus, a veteran Space Marine who was a major character in the previous game.
Oh, cool.
And it sounds like the story picks up right where the last game left off, with Titus and his squad facing an even bigger threat this time.
So there's some continuity for fans of the first game?
Exactly.
I like that. It gives the story more weight. You know, it's not just some random plot slapped on top of the action.
Yeah, and the sources suggest that the story actually gets into some pretty interesting themes, like duty sacrifice and what it really means to be a Space Marine.
Wait, Space Marines thinking about the meaning of life. That's not what I was expecting. I thought it was all chainswords and explosions.
Well, it seems like there's more to these guys than just that. They're not just mindless killing machines, they're super disciplined soldiers with this strict code of honor.
Right.
And the story explores all of that.
Interesting.
It forces you to make some hard choices that have real consequences.
So it's not just a power fantasy then, it's also a story about the burdens that come with that power.
It seems that way, and they say the story is told through a bunch of different ways, like cinematic cutscenes, in-game dialogue, and even environmental storytelling.
So they're really going all out to immerse you in the world and the story.
Yeah, exactly. And they even talk about how the co-op gameplay is tied into the narrative.
Really?
You're not just fighting alongside your squad mates, you're building relationships with them, sharing experiences that shape how you see the war and your place in it.
So the co-op isn't just a gameplay thing, it's part of the story itself.
It seems that way, and they suggest that this shared experience is really powerful. It creates a sense of camaraderie and shared purpose that makes both the gameplay and the story even better.
Wow. It's like they thought of everything. I'm blown away by how much depth there is in this game.
Yeah, it's impressive.
It's not just about being a badass space marine. It's about exploring what war does to people, the bonds between brothers in arms, and the responsibility that comes with power.
For sure.
Makes you wonder what kind of impact a game like this could have on people, right?
Yeah, could it change how I see war and violence?
Right. Could it even make them more cooperative and compassionate in their own lives?
It's just a game, but games can really transport you to other worlds, make you feel things you never expected.
It's true. Maybe after playing as Lieutenant Titus, people will walk away with a new understanding of how complex war really is and how important teamwork is.
It's possible, and it shows how video games are changing. They're not just about escaping anymore.
Right.
They're about exploring complicated ideas, challenging perspectives, and maybe even making us better people.
I think it's safe to say that Space Marine 2 is way more than just another action game.
I think so too.
It's a really well-made experience that blends intense combat, a captivating story, and co-op gameplay to create a power fantasy that you won't forget.
Yeah, it's a game that's both exciting and thought-provoking. It really shows what video games can do, entertain, engage, and even inspire.
Well, I think it's time for us to gear up and jump into the action ourselves.
I'm ready.
I'm ready to unleash some Space Marine fury and see what this epic war is all about.
Let's do it. Let's experience the power of brotherhood in the face of overwhelming odds.
Thanks for listening, everyone.